to Co-Opinions. My name is Josh, and today I have Nick with me.
Hey, Josh.
So, it's been a while since we've recorded anything, so we'll go into what we've been playing, and then we'll get into our big topic. But due to the big topic this week, I'll start her off. I haven't been playing a lot because I've been trying to focus on a certification test that I'm working toward. Yeah, it's not super exciting, but it's professionally fulfilling, whatever. Neither here nor there. So I have been trying to get some here and there trophies. I don't remember if I mentioned it on the last thing I recorded, but I got the platinum in FF15. Woo! I remember when we had Chris on, I said, this doesn't sound like it's for me. And here we are a couple weeks later, and I'm part of the club.
I did enjoy that you had the same experience with the Adamantoise fight as I did. Neither of us were as great as Chris, who can just kill this thing in like 30 minutes. And now, in the new latest patch version, then they're going ahead and bragging about how you can use the Eterna spell to kill it.
I've seen the videos. The fact you can one-shot something with 5 million HP, they're going to nerf that.
They highlighted that in the actual trailer. So with the
Are you serious?
Yes, the trailer ends with them proccing Eternity on Adamantoise. So they knew exactly what they were doing with this.
I kind of wish I would have waited just a little bit then, but one thing that I did do differently than you is I didn't do most of the challenge dungeons, because I did one of them because I read online the best equipment for these people comes from this one. It was like 3rd out of 9 or something, and it was so boring. It was just blank room after blank. There's nothing intriguing about it. So when there was no accomplishment associated with it, I decided I'm going to duck out of this because Nick said they don't get better. And with the Adamantoise, I thought the Adamantoise was going to be harder because the final legendary weapon quest is against a demon called Nafalgar or something like that. And he's a monster. He's an absolute wreck. Adamantoise was just long and boring. I used less healing items fighting Adamantoise. It's just...
Right. For that final hunt for the ultimate weapon, people were uploading video of that encounter and tagging it as Omega Weapon, and I think that's kind of fitting given how brutal he was, and exactly as you said, that was a very challenging fight. It was a fun fight even if it was difficult and involved chugging on a lot of potions. Adamantoise, boring, terrible.
Not the best. And other than that, I've been trying to get the trophies in Resident Evil 7. Actually, Nick just saw me get the last collectible coin in the hardest difficulty, so probably by the end of the day I'll have the hardest difficulty beaten, which means all I have left is to collect all the coins on an easier difficulty. It's going to be Babytown Frolics. But enough about me. Nick, what have you been playing?
Well, Josh, recently I wrapped up Grim Fandango Remastered. That was a lot of fun. I played that back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and had a lot of fun with it, so it was nice just revisiting that. Still, my favorite line out of that entire game's got to be Chapter 2, whenever one of the fellows goes, "We are all members of the same nation, and our king rides a pale white horse." And I was like, wow, that's a great line. Then shortly after that, I get the trophy with that little line. That was a nice little detail of that game I liked for the trophies, was how they took some of those memorable one-liners and then had those be the trophies that popped. Since it's an adventure game, what else are you really going to do for that?
And a lot of the trophies, in fact, almost all of them have to do with exhausting all of the conversation options with people, which is a really clever way to make sure that you actually talk to everybody. Did you see the one gold that said something along the lines of Tim Schafer made us put this in?
Yes, play through the game with the original tank controls.
Right. It's not that bad.
It was a clever way to go ahead and guide people to use that dialogue, because I think a lot of people, especially with these obscure adventure games, get very focused just on, okay, I got my guide right in front of me and I'm going to go ahead and go on through it. And for some of these adventure games with the puzzles they have, I don't really blame them for that. But I think those people can tend to kind of rush through things, and having these trophies, I think, increase the likelihood that people would focus on, you're in an adventure game, explore the world, experience this world building they're trying to do with you here.
And it's interesting because at some point, I want to do an episode on metagaming, how trophies and achievements have affected how people are playing games. This is actually one of the few times I can think of how trophies and achievements would have positively influenced it. Because I know there's one trophy that I can't think of why you would get it normally, but it's called Fear Robert Frost Pigeons, which... the game's writing is phenomenal. We beat it a couple years ago as well. There's just little things that you wouldn't think to go out of the way to do, but they programmed a lot of stuff in there. And it's really well done, even if some of the puzzles, I know there was one, I think it was year 2, when you had to put a bunch of real archaic bits together to figure out this race was run on this month, on this day, based on the fact they're wearing a hat and there's a blimp going by, but the blimp crashed on da-da-da-da-da.
The game came out in 1997, I believe, and I really feel like that was the kind of the worst part of the adventure game era from a puzzle design perspective. It had really gotten to the point where the developers of these adventure games seemed focused on, can I stump the player? Let's see how long I can make them it takes for them to figure this out.
I remember, though this is getting off Grim Fandango for a moment, there was a puzzle in either a King's Quest or a Quest for Glory where you had to figure out a gnome's name or something, and it involved
that was King's Quest 1, yes. So what you had to do was, instead of Rumpelstiltskin, you had to type Rumpelstiltskin backward.
And yeah, why would you think that? Whatever. Grim Fandango was an amazing game. I'm glad you finally got around to wrapping it up. I know that's something that's been sitting on your backlog for quite a while. What else?
Other than that, recently I beat Shantae Risky's Revenge on the PlayStation 4. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed having a nice kind of compact Metroidvania kind of thing. Some parts of the pacing were a little bit odd. As I mentioned to you before, Josh, having the mermaid section at the very end just seemed kind of arbitrary. Find these 3 mystical MacGuffins so you can now do the side-scrolling shooter portion before you go fight the final boss.
Now, 2 things of note on Shantae Risky's Revenge. 1, this is not the first game in the series. In fact, the original came out on Game Boy Color. However, I picked that up on the 3DS Virtual Console, and I recommended you not pick it up because while it was probably great and whenever it came out, it has not aged well. However, Shantae Risky's Revenge originally came out on DSiWare, and that is a 5-hour game. One thing that was interesting, and I think I brought this up to you, was the fact it was originally planned to be released episodically. So, with knowing it was meant to be released episodically, does that make the pacing make a little more sense?
Absolutely.
However, when you were wrapping up Risky's Revenge, it made me think, because I'm going to get around to the 4th Shantae game before terribly long, shortly after I get my cert, ideally, and that is Shantae Half Genie Hero. It was a Kickstarter that was one of the early ones and it took forever to come out, but it's been getting positive reviews. And I played the 3rd game in a Humble Bundle because the Wii U had a Humble Bundle. I picked it up. The game was gorgeous. It was gorgeous enough. I picked up the earlier one, said, Nick, you need to try these.
Gorgeous Arabian.
Yeah, that was definitely a factor. I can't say the belly dancing wasn't something that little young Josh would have went, ooh. However, the writing was still really good. The action was really good. If I'm wrong, she never has to actually be rescued in the 2nd game.
Nope.
And she's a fairly independent, strong female character for all intents and purposes. So that got me thinking, what strong female characters did we encounter growing up? Because I know over the past few years there's been a growing discontent about the representation of female in video games. However, I was curious, what exactly did we get out of our formative years? So today, what we're going to talk about is from about when we can remember to approximately 16, we're going to talk about the females that we played as, were strong supporting characters, were strong characters in general, and maybe how we might view them now.
And just to date that 16 and prior to that, then essentially early 2000s and before that.
Yes.
Nothing afterwards.
So real early 90s to about 2003-ish, approximately thereabouts. So I racked my brain to think of playable female characters on the Nintendo, and the obvious one is Samus from Metroid. However, being honest, I did not play it on Nintendo. The first Metroid game I actually played was Metroid Fusion, which came out on the Game Boy Advance. At that point, it was well known that Samus was a female. However, Metroid Zero Mission had not come out yet. I have a whole side tangent, so make sure to put a pin in yours because this is an interesting case. Metroid Fusion, I'd always heard great things about Super Metroid. I heard that was, it's the defining game between Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Those 2 games made up the Metroidvania genre. And at that point, the Zero Suit had not been introduced, which is important because in the very first game, you did not know Samus was female until the very end, and it was basically out of nowhere. In Super Metroid, every time she died, her suit exploded off of her, and she wore a two-piece. It wasn't a bikini. It was shorts and some kind of crop top. I don't know. I'm wearing a t-shirt and jeans right now. Fashion is not my forte. But it was interesting because the second incarnation of her, she's already kind of wearing less clothing. And it was a incentive in both the first game, the second game, every game. The faster you beat the game, the less clothing you got to see her in. Which I always thought was kind of counterintuitive to what they seem to be trying to communicate here. And by the time Metroid Zero Mission rolled around, which was a reimagining of the first game in Metroid Fusion style gameplay, it had a map, it had a lot more accessibility enabled. About 3/4 through the game, you lose your suit and you are in the Zero suit, which is a skin-tight blue suit, bodysuit. At this point, though the game played great, I loved Zero Mission. Did you play Zero Mission?
Yep.
I beat that game on normal, hard. I got 100% under 2 hours, and I crushed that game. I loved it to death. But I always thought it was odd that from a thematic standpoint, you understood why she lost her suit, because then it allowed her to get her other suit, showed that she could be stealthy in addition to strong. But it always struck me as odd that they chose the skin-tight blue bodysuit.
The sexualized nature of it.
Right. And it exploded after that Zero suit came out. You see all kinds of fan art, air quotes, involving the Zero suit. Or she's wearing giant heels, which, don't get me wrong, they try to shoehorn in why she's wearing giant heels, but latex blue skin suit, giant heels, I mean, it's oddly sexual given that the past decade and a half, no, at that point it had been closer to 2 decades, she has been basically just a stoic, silent female. Did I think that she was weaker because of it? No, but I did think it muddled the message they were trying to communicate. And though this is outside of the scope, they gave her a lot more characterization in Other M. We're not going to touch on that. We're going to talk about how as she progressed, she seemed to get less what she started as. Do you think that was an attempt to try and characterize her that went awry? Why do you think that they might have done that? It just seemed like a really odd decision to me.
I think that part of that might be to go ahead, and I'm going to be cynical here, and it's the obvious answer is go ahead and appeal to teenage boys who are playing these games.
Yeah, I could see that, but it's not like they put it on the cover.
It's not as if they put it on the cover, but more of just like one of those things to go ahead and keep them invested. I mean, if you think about Super Metroid, you mentioned how that armor goes ahead and blows off. Mm-hmm. That when she made the noise that she makes there, like it shows her head kind of rocking back and going, "Ugh." I always thought that had a weird erotic charge to it. I may be misremembering it, but I kind of felt like they tried to add that element even as far back as Super Metroid.
I think personally, and this is my interpretation, I did not play it as a child. I did not play it when I was younger. So I would think at that point we just didn't have any context for what was and wasn't sexual. Anything that sounded even remotely like what we were hearing through the scrambled channels, that might be sexual. So, but they maybe they were going that angle. I had not considered that. But that was the one Nintendo one that immediately jumped out at me. The other one, and we'll burn through this one relatively quick, was Princess Peach. So in the first game, she was not a strong female character. She was just the flag at the end of the course. And in the second game, because of the way it got localized, they did not bring the original Super Mario Bros. 2 over. Instead, So Doki Doki Panic was localized as Super Mario Bros. 2, and due to circumstance, they had 4 characters, and they chose Mario, Luigi, Toad, and Peach. Peach had the unique ability to float over stuff, which I know growing up, a lot of people chose Peach because it just made her a lot easier to use. So in this case, and 4 or 5? We were young when we played that game. And it made Peach an actual character that you wanted to gravitate toward and use. Well, the next game that she was playable in was Super Mario RPG, which we talked about at length on our last podcast together. You still had to spend the first, half of the game rescuing her? But after you got her, she was an indispensable healing member. So I don't know if that counts her as a strong character or just You split the difference? What would you consider that?
I consider her a strong character in that, partially from the gameplay thing that, as you spoke about in Mario 2 and in Mario RPG, but also in Mario RPG for her characterization. I mean, yes, she's feminine, but yes, she gets rescued, but and from her dialogue, my personal memory of her is being fairly vocal, having opinions and belief on what the party should be doing at particular points in time.
And though it is not necessarily a protagonist on this one, I remember Super Mario RPG also still had a lot of other strong female characters who were represented. The one specific one, though you can argue that she was more sexualized than just strong, would be Valentina, because she orchestrated the whole usurp of Mallow's kingdom. That's definitely a power move. There's no way around that. Anyways, I've been bogarting the first part of this. Nick, why don't you give some examples of, while you were growing up, strong female characters in games?
Well, some of the first ones that came to mind, as we kind of touched on before, we really couldn't think of a lot that were on the original Nintendo. And my other system of choice for me was a computer. We had a computer with some LucasArts games. And I remember Loom having two very strong female characters. The game starts off with a woman challenging the elders of this Weaver's Guild.
Now, real quick, I'm sorry, Loom?
Yes,
Loom?
Yep.
Okay, I've never heard of this game before, so I apologize.
No worries at all. So Loom was made by LucasArts and involves these different guilds: a guild of shepherds, a guild of smiths, a guild of clergymen, a guild of weavers, and so on. And it involves kind of a good versus evil kind of narrative. So you are the main character, Bobbin Threadbare, and you were born from... Yeah, you like that name?
That's a pretty great name.
There's another name called like Heidi Firmflanks or something like that for one of the shepherds, and then one of the smiths' name is Rusty.
All right.
But going back to Bobbin, you are born from the Loom. So your mother challenges the elders and says, "Look, our people are infertile," and she plucks you from there and then weaves you into existence using a thread plucked from this giant loom that they have. She's turned into a swan and banished, and she appears in the game to go ahead and give you guidance at different points. And you are also at that point, and you are also guided by a woman who is friends with your mother named Herschel. In both of these cases, and you had these women challenging authority figures and also providing guidance and mentorship to your character at different points. Some other examples from the LucasArts lore that come to mind. One that I think is interesting is Maniac Mansion. So this game involves you, a high school man named Dave, with friends breaking into this mansion, kind of a send-up of a lot of the 50s sort of sci-fi tropes, to rescue his girlfriend, Sandy. So it sounds like, okay, it's just another woman as a plot device thing. However, you also have female protagonists who can go ahead and can be part of that party that have unique skills. So one of them's Wendy. She's a novelist. So you find a manuscript and you can go ahead and punch up that manuscript and send it off if you have that character. Another one is Razor. She's a musician.
Oh, yeah.
You can go ahead and record. So you can go ahead and do some recording stuff if you have a musician. You can play the piano in the game and use that to solve puzzles. So I thought that was interesting, where you had the Save the Princess as a plot type, but then you also had unique female characters. Additionally, I would like to call out Elaine Marley in Monkey Island. So in the Monkey Island series, Guybrush Threepwood is a little bit of a doofus, to put it politely.
But can he hold his breath for a super long time?
Yes, he can, 10 minutes, and he will in fact die if you want to test the developer's fortitude, if they actually programmed that. So with Elaine Marley, though, she's a very intelligent woman. She's the governor of the island. So here you have a woman in a position of political power, a woman who is wiser than you, and you, as Guybrush Threepwood, attempting to save her, managed to actually just screw things up and cause more trouble. But it all works out for the best. So those were the examples that were most prominent in my personal childhood with the LucasArts games.
So I know there were a couple other examples that I formulated, but you ended up knowing a lot more than I was anticipating. The specific one I wanted to bring up was, how do we quantify females in fighting games from our youth? The most specific example being Chun-Li. Almost everybody's familiar with Chun-Li, and in a lot of cases, she, is sexualized because she's a female in a game. However, minus her...
I will say with that, she's also sexualized because her fighting animation where she does her Hadouken involves her skirt billowing up.
Right, it doesn't help. But as far as being revealing, it's really only her legs. Like, you don't see a lot of the T, mostly A. But I know that she has story involved, but I don't know, do we consider her a strong female character? I know when I was younger, I played as her because she kicked a lot, and I'm like, yeah. And that's a bad representation. It is. So it's one of those things that you want to come back and look at. It's like, was I doing this for the right reason? No, I wasn't. Did a lot of other people do this for the wrong reason? Yeah, they kind of did.
I know that I played as Cammy on Street Fighter Alpha 3 because one of her poses involved her standing backwards, and you had her blonde pigtails going ahead and trailing down, covering her buttocks.
Right.
So going back to Chun-Li, however, as far as the lore for Chun-Li, I don't consider her a strong character, and I actually think the way the Street Fighter represented women was a little bit odd, kind of early on. So if you think about our two main characters, Cammy, of course, has that weird slavery angle where Bison was grooming her to be one of his living dolls to transplant his consciousness into for immortality.
Everything's weird about that.
Yes.
Everything's weird. Living doll. So he's going to transfer himself into her, which, I mean, you might as well let him because he'd never leave the house. I'm about to say, well, it was Carlin who said that. It's like, yeah,
But going back to Chun-Li and Cammy, so we covered a Cammy's storyline. As far as Chun-Li is about avenging her father, of course, and that is a good motivation. But then in the ending for Street Fighter 2, then it's like, yay, now I can be an ordinary girl again, and she's wearing these super sexualized clothes. So it's like, okay, I got a mission. I'm putting on all this stuff to go ahead to the role of this strong woman, and now I'm just taking it off because reality is I'm just frivolous and fun and yay. I did not think she was strong. Later on, then I believe they turned her into an Interpol agent, and I think that context, then she definitely represents a strong female lead.
But this is a bad representation from our childhood, which I like to think didn't negatively affect how we view or influence, but this would be a great time to have a female who could come on here and talk about this stuff. I'm going to sincerely reach out and ask some females I know to give this a listen, and I would love their input on this, because I'd love to know how they viewed these growing up.
Leaving aside the Street Fighter ones, then, we talk about them as kind of unhealthy representations of women, and where you have some stuff where it feels like it defeats what they could have been accomplishing with that. I'd like to talk about the Quest for Glory series, where I believe you had a lot of very strong female characters. So in the Quest for Glory game, playing as a white, blonde male protagonist. However, over the course of this adventure, then some of the other heroes that help you along the way include Uhura. She is a black woman who because her tribe, a kind of a rural tribe, insisted that if women wanted to have children, they couldn't be warriors, decided to just go ahead and have a child independent of the tribe, then come back as a warrior to essentially say, no, I'm going to do what I want. I can be a warrior and a mother at the same time. You also had Elsa. In front of the hero in the first game is to rescue the Baron's son, drive the evil witch Baba Yaga out of the land, and also try to find the Baron's daughter and defeat the brigands. Well, what you find is that the leader of the brigands actually is Elsa. So instead of actually rescuing her, she's being brainwashed by the witch, and you can go ahead and dispel that and fix that. But she is entirely capable and competent of standing on her own. She's one of the rough and tumble fighter heroes that you encounter later on in the series as that series progresses. There's also another one that comes to mind in that regard is Katrina. She was a villain in the fourth game. In that game, she plays a role as a vampire essentially. So I thought that was kind of interesting in a sort of a femme fatale way, where they managed to incorporate kind of a very attractive nature to the character, but also imbued that with a little bit of a sinister air, to where she was it's almost like she's attracted to you, but she's also trying to destroy you. A real Black Widow type of character, I would say.
So do you think that the Black Widow type, because when I was doing my research about this beforehand, it talked about females, and we're going to have to go a little beyond, just for a moment, beyond our youth of games. Like, you had certain characters like Alex Vance from Half-Life 2, who she was a very strong female character with very little sexualization to her, but there were also females who they got lumped into the evil but sexy. Now, do you think that it undercuts the strength of them if they have to be evil like how many females can you think of that are just evil? I can think of a couple, but they always have some kind of sexual angle to them, which seems odd to me.
Well, when you talk about evil and sexy characters, my mind immediately went to the Dark Queen from the Battletoads games.
Yeah, who is unreasonably tall and unreasonably skinny.
Right. So I would make a distinction between those kind of female characters and when I think of a Black Widow type, what I think that kind of introduces is that thing of, all right, what's going to kind of overpower their interest in your character or their desire to destroy your character. To me, that's a valid dramatic hook to go ahead and insert into the story. I view that as slightly different than just, okay, evil and sexy as a trope.
Okay. Because, yeah, that was one of the things I was trying to think about it. And like you said, you got your Dark Queen who looks like she's ripped off of a 70s van. And then you never played the series, but there's some... And you did play. You played the first Uncharted game and said, no, and you just ducked out of it. In the third game, there was a female antagonist who wasn't sexualized in the slightest. But I feel like that is an incredible minority, which is, kind of unfair in my eyes because I think unattractive people can be just as mean. So
I will say in this context for Quest for Glory that I feel more comfortable with that kind of a role of sexy and evil if it's done alongside other female characters. So since this was a game universe with a pretty good slate of gender and racial diversity for a game series in the late 80s and early 1990s, I'll add, which I think is pretty notable.
Yeah.
Because of that, I found it a lot less striking. Like, Uhura is not necessarily an unattractive woman. They didn't go ahead and give her like massive scars all over her face and missing teeth, but at the same time, she wasn't sexualized in any regard at any point. I never found myself looking back at any memories of that character erotically, and same with some of the other female characters in that series.
Now, I think that this is a pretty decent segue to talk about females who may have had their strength as a character undercut by their sexualization. And there is no shortage of a list here. So let's go ahead right into it with the preeminent example being Lara Croft. Early 90s, there was not a lot of games where you could play as a female in an action game where you were hunting dinosaurs and collecting relics, but everybody focused on the boobs. And fun trivia fact, do you know the boobs were an accident?
Yes.
So that it's kind of an unfortunate relic of a bygone era when he's like, oh, I accidentally made these, what was it, twice, 3 times the size they were supposed to be?
I'm sure it was a real accident. I'm sure that it wasn't anything that he was just curious about. I wonder what happens if I key in an 8 instead of a 2 here.
And, well, the way he tells it is he accidentally did it, and when he went to change it back, everybody else goes, wait a second. Maybe not.
I'm imagining the monolith scene at the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Dun, dun, dun,
boop, 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 boop. And when they did interviews, they said, oh, we never expected her to be viewed this way. I bet you didn't. And as you watch the character progress, I know that there was a point, I think it may have been there was one where she dressed up in a black cat suit, Angel of Darkness, I think it was. And there was a lot of criticism of that game, not just because of how she was represented, but because it wasn't a very good game. So you saw her become a lot more conservative after that point. She started wearing realistic clothes up to the point where this most current reboot, don't get me wrong, there's times she shows skin, but at no point is she wearing Daisy Dukes and halter top. So these early games, they were strong games. I played the first 2. I think the first 4 are the ones where they say you're still good with those. I played the first 2, and they were decent action-adventure games. They were games that I would recommend other people check out if they're curious about.
I do think that with that character, that's a great example of being able to go ahead and reclaim something like that, where a character from 20 years ago who was hypersexualized is now being brought as a more realistic character. That kind of parallels what you see with comic books with Wonder Woman, where in Wonder Woman's initial instantiation, very much hypersexualized. And later on, what they found, I remember reading, this was in the early 2000s, they said they encountered difficulty where it was it's predominantly, the character is predominantly written by gay men, because I frequently had issues where if you gave that character to a man to write, then they made Wonder Woman to very much kind of a sexual object, and if you gave it to a woman to write, they kind of made it a Mary Sue, super powerful female empowerment figure. They found that gay men were the best able to go ahead and depict her as a more human character.
Interesting. I was unaware of that. And that's one of the other things where it feels unfair to have to say reclaim it from being hypersexualized, because I don't recall her doing anything overtly sexy in those first 4 games. Like, I don't ever remember her going down a fireman's pole or anything. So
I think a lot of it was the imagery surrounding her in the marketing. Like, I remember the calendars at Best Buy whenever I was a teenager, where it's essentially, here's the Lara Croft calendar. I remember the advertisement where it's got Duke Nukem kind of covering her breasts with his hands.
Yeah, what was that? Not Janet Jackson style. That's what that reminds me of. In the games, I don't ever recall her being like that. So it was curious that it was around all the marketing, because when you played the games, for all intents and purposes, it was an action game where you were just playing as a pithy female. I liked her one-liners. I thought that she was actually a really good character at the time, which isn't to say that she became less human as it went on. The games just got worse. There's no way around that. But I do like where they've taken the series now. I played the 2 newest ones. I know you have the first of the reboot, but you've never got around to it. It's really good. If you ever find yourself with extra time, you should get around to checking it out. But neither here nor there. Another one that I find interesting, how it's progressed, is Jill Valentine. Now, I'm not going to mention Claire Redfield because she was in Resident Evil 2?
Yep.
Yeah, Resident Evil 2. And as of now, I have played 0, 1, 4, 5, 6, 7. And 2, they're supposed to be remaking from the ground up. 3, we haven't heard anything on. But if 2 gets remade from the ground up, we have Super HD versions of 4, 5, 6, 7, and now we're also hearing Code Veronica X might be coming to PS4 and Xbox One. They gotta do 3 if 2 sells well. But that's neither here nor there. I've only played games that have Jill Valentine and Ada Wong. Did Ada Wong Did Ada Wong begin in RE2?
That's correct.
Okay. So she's also heavily featured in 4 and 6 as well. But I only know we're going to focus on Jill Valentine for this. Because while I only played the first game, and she's also in the 5th one, she is in the 3rd one as well, which I only played the very beginning of, which is Nemesis. Mm-hmm. But I played enough to be able to speak to the context I'm angling at here. So in the first one, she is it her first day on Stars in Resident Evil 1? I know she's new. I don't know how new. And she's in full police getup. Like, she's wearing her little beret. She's wearing full covering for all intents and purposes. And you could play as 2 people in the first Resident Evil game. You could either play as Chris Redfield, or Jill Valentine. And depending on how you wanted to look at it, Jill could almost be seen as easy mode, hear me out, because she could open doors with a lockpick, which allowed you to do a lot of shortcuts. And there were some challenges that weren't there. For example, the infamous berry sandwich scene. So when you go to take the shotgun, I believe it is, a roof starts collapsing down on you. And then Barry, a different character in the game, busts you out of the room and says, "Oh, you almost became a Jill sandwich." Which, the voice acting is not aged well. The original was bad. GameCube remake was not much better. But the PS4 remake took the GameCube one. And this is important because when I brought this up to you before, I asked, does it kind of seem like they're undercutting her strength as a character? Because she goes through this whole house and she only one time, to my recollection, needs to be saved, and that's by Barry. And I go, is that undercutting her strength as a character by her needing to be saved? And your response, I don't want to mow your grass here.
My response is a definite no. I didn't feel like this. She seemed helpless. She was completely poised to take advantage of that opportunity. I think about that kind of situation about seeing a ceiling descending to crush you, and that would terrify me. I think I would bonafide my pants if that were to happen. And with that, she's essentially poisoned. As soon as he kicks open that door and has the opportunity, she dives through that door. She's very much alert, focused, and ready. She seems competent and capable the entire time through. And as you called out, her outfit in this game isn't particularly revealing either. I will say there is one other time that she's saved, but this is also the case where Chris gets saved, is at the end whenever Brad Vickers shows up with the helicopter to go ahead and get them out of there and gives them the rocket launcher to shoot Nemesis with. So with that, I kind of view that as just showing cooperation in a case where I think criticism can be a little bit too heavy-handed.
Right.
This idea of a police squad being trapped in this mansion and then occasionally helping each other out, that to me seems normal.
And they actually added something. You weren't aware of this because I don't think you played the GameCube version, you played the PlayStation one, is that they introduced a new character. I think her name was Lisa Trevor, I believe. And the idea was it gave a little more backstory behind what Umbrella was doing at the mansion, because she had a bunch of experiments done on her. She chases you through a few parts, and almost as if to balance back out, I don't know if Chris does this because I've only played through it with Jill, but near the end of the game when you're having the showdown with Lisa, and I will correct this later online if I'm getting the name wrong, but when you have the showdown with her, you have the opportunity whether or not to give Barry back his gun. Now, this is when you're unsure if Barry is actually a traitor or not, so you would be understood for not giving him back his giant Magnum revolver. But if you don't give it back to him, Lisa will kill him instantly. So they kind of shift the power back to you, which I'm really curious if that's a thing that happens with Chris as well. Because I'm not sure if there's conflict that happens the same way if you're playing as Chris.
My personal memory of playing as Chris with the first Resident Evil is that you do not encounter Barry at any point. So.
Okay. So yeah, there'd be no conflict there. But as the series progressed, I can't speak to RE2 because, again, haven't played it. Do you want to say anything about it, or are we just better off?
I don't think there's anything that I can really add to that. Unfortunately, I don't really remember anything about Claire's storyline.
All right. Well, what is worth focusing on for Resident Evil 3 is there's no way to beat around the bush. They definitely advertised Jill wearing a particular outfit for that. Which, it's unfortunate, sort of, is a good outfit.
It's a blue strapless top held up by her ample bosom, and then it is a little miniskirt.
Yeah, black miniskirt, which, it's not a bad look, but it does not reflect the person you saw in the first game, image-wise.
Right. And for a woman trying to bust out of the city, it kind of seems like an odd selection. Like,
right. Why
would she actually just go ahead and pick this most revealing thing? Why not something rugged? Why not something with more pockets, jeans, something like that? Literally
anything. And
to which point, I guess we could contrast her with Claire Redfield in the second game, where Claire is wearing full-on pants. She's wearing a vest. She's again, is a curvaceous woman, certainly, but at least she's dressed practically. There's that. And
we will actually be able to present another contrast to her Resident Evil 3 appearance, because it almost, again, this might take a slight SJW tint to it, so I'll pivot away from it quick. But you have this woman wearing a strapless top and a miniskirt, constantly being menaced by a giant male figure. I mean, not subtle, guys, but you do kill him. You kill him graphically.
Who you meet as he impales someone with his tentacle.
Yeah, not subtle. Not subtle. But do you remember playing through Resident Evil 5?
One last note I'd like to make on the Jill design is I think that in the gameplay itself, then obviously it's impractical, but I think it's better than the marketing images you see. The look she has on her face almost seems like she's doing some sort of model walk, where it's almost a little bit of a sultry look they gave her for the advertising.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense. I did remember it, but it didn't make any sense.
I think when you talk about that SJW bent, I think a lot of what we're seeing now with that is just kind of a counterswing because of how ridiculous things were in the late 90s, early 2000s.
But do you remember Resident Evil 5? This is only for point of comparison because this is now outside of our window.
Yep.
So near the end of Resident Evil 5, for the whole game, you're semi-convinced that your partner, Jill Valentine, is dead. You're playing as Chris Redfield, and you're convinced that she's dead. And near the end of the game, you find her, and she is introduced wearing a blue cat suit where she has a mind control thing put on her chest for some reason. But when you see her in flashbacks, she's wearing her full, I think that she was still in Stars at the time, her full Stars gear. So she's got the hat, she's got the full pants, she's got the tactical gear. When you play as her in these flashbacks, she is fully decked out, fully capable. So it's curious that they contrasted such a practical perspective with a such impractical perspective. But when you do play as her, in my opinion, both in the flashbacks and in the other DLC, I do not believe she is sexualized in any capacity. In fact, where her mind control device is located, that's not really sexy at all, because especially when you remove it and there's all these holes in her chest, it's gross. There's no two ways about it. I thought that was an interesting swing back from Resident Evil 3, where she was not portrayed nearly as well as Resident Evil 5, where she's portrayed incredibly, I don't know. I'm also speaking from a male perspective here. If anybody's played these games and disagrees with me and is a female, let me know. I would love to hear a different perspective.
This is in the episode of Co-Opinions where white males talk about female characters in gaming. Next episode, we're going to talk about blacks in gaming, but we're not going to invite any of our black friends.
Chris, you're not invited. Anyways, that was just my perspective on it. And this is why, we were the target demographic growing up. So, again, I don't think this caused us to view anything askew. I don't think that we see females as inherently weak or anything.
Well, when you think about how much media that someone consumes over the course of their childhood, there's movies, television shows, things you see in advertisements. There's real life things just as far as what you experience at school or what you kind of see modeled in your own family life. I think it's very easy for us to say, oh, hey, we didn't really pull anything from this. But looking at my perspective, then I had a lot of strong female video game characters alongside these more sexualized characters that we saw. I feel like I got a nice balance with that. I'd be curious if for someone who didn't experience any of those strong characters, who didn't necessarily have strong female figures in their life. Josh, you know my mother, and she has exceptionally strong opinions and is very willing to defend and engage on these.
Very willing to engage.
So with that, then I don't think that I think all of that kind of preempted any possibility of me internalizing bad stereotypes from these kind of characters.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not just what you take in; it's how you contextualize it. Mm-hmm. So we have approximately 15 minutes left. So I'm going to. What do you think we should have the focus be on here? Do you want it to be? We got some JRPGs. I would like to touch on Zelda versus Sheik, and just talk about Dixie Kong and Tiny Kong, was it? Tiny
Candy Kong. Sexy monkey.
Yeah, okay, that's actually another good. So just as the quick Zelda versus Sheik thing, I thought it was odd that even when I was a kid, so I guess spoilers for Ocarina of Time. So Sheik, who is assisting you the entire time you're an adult in Ocarina of Time, strong, capable male, supposedly. But then, in the stinger, gasp, it's actually Zelda. The second you find out that Sheik isn't a man and is a female, gets captured, immediately loses all agency. Was that weird to you? I thought that was... I know why, because she was hiding.
To tell you the truth, it never really made any sort of an impact on me as a kid. I still just thought it was, oh, cool, Sheik Zelda is this tough badass. I never thought of it like that, but that is a very good point that as soon as that...
it never jumped out at me as, oh, hey, now that she's actually a female, now she can be captured. It was, hey, her identity's been revealed, which she was hiding the whole time. But they very much are portraying Sheik as a dude. They're very much trying to make you think that. And it was an awesome twist when you were a kid that, oh my god, it's actually Zelda. But then, oh hey, now Ganon can stick her in a crystal. I thought that was odd. And they've done a lot for her character. I haven't played Breath of the Wild yet. I want to play it so bad. But games like, what was that? Spirit Tracks, where she's actively assisting you. Twilight Princess, where she is a battle princess, battle queen.
For Spirit Tracks, that's another case where I seem to remember her having a lot of great kind of lines as she's helping to guide Link. And I also think that a Wind Waker is a great one to go ahead and I think you're going to transition to that.
That's
one of my favorite moments is whenever she comes up with that plan to go ahead and infiltrate the focus, and then you just see Link with a look that's just screaming, "God damn it, I can't believe I'm doing this," as he's fired from the cannon.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. Tetra, now, again, having not played Breath of the Wild, Tetra was maybe my favorite Zelda. She was amazing. And that still falls within the scope of formative years, because that was right at the tail end. Tetra was amazing.
Tetra's an interesting case, though, because once she establishes that princess identity, then you kind of see the end of that feisty ability to rebel. At that point, she's captured by Ganon, if I remember correctly.
I can't remember. She has to stay in her Hyrule after she gets but I don't feel like she got captured. I know that she assists you in the final fight.
That's true.
Which is hilarious. Because that's another interesting thing, is that in Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, she fires the light arrows in you. She takes the controlling, like, you can't win without her. So that's a great representation of Zelda. So good job on those, Nintendo. And let's see. Okay. So, did you want to... We have...
One quick Zelda note as well. I think we should mention Linkle in Hyrule Warriors 3D.
Oh, yeah!
Although that's outside of this time period, as long as we're speaking of that, I personally thought the Linkle thing was just a little bit silly, and that I would want a little bit more creativity for a female Link than what they did with that.
Yeah. What if Zelda was a girl? Amazing. So another one that jumped out at me is really interesting was Chrono Trigger. Because at first it seems like at the beginning of this game, you run into this girl and you help her around the fair, and it turns out she's a princess, and you think you have to go save the princess. But when you get there, it turns out she doesn't really need saving. Sort of. Her ancestor, whatever. You don't end up directly saving her, but then she ends up providing you with a ton of assistance. And meanwhile, your childhood friend... in this case, we were talking about Marl and Luca, respectively. And your childhood friend, who's a brilliant inventor who creates all these awesome things, including the travel device, the time travel device, she never needs to be saved in any capacity. So even though you have the princess figure, who is rebellious, and yeah, she's a little girly. You have the other one who's entirely independent, incredibly smart. There might be one other person in the game who's as smart as she is. So the representation there I also thought was very strong. Oh, and I forgot about Ayla.
Ayla's a great example.
I completely forgot the leader of her tribe who beats enemies to death with her hand. Yeah. Chrono Trigger killed it.
And besides beating enemies to death with hand, also encouraging her boyfriend, future husband, to go ahead and be stronger whenever he's showing signs of weakness, encouraging him to go ahead and be the best version of himself for the good of the tribe.
And though a mild case could be made because she was wearing a fur bikini, it's whatever. I mean, she led the tribe well. It
would be just as silly to require none of our video game characters to ever be as attractive as to have some who are conventionally attractive, some who are just average looking, and so on.
I mean, I like my barbarians burly. It's a video game. I'm playing it for unrealistic standards. That's just me. So, Chrono Trigger, now saying it out loud, they did really well with the representation of that game. I'm trying to think if there were any other significant...
Chrono's mom. I tossed that out as a joke. I don't actually have anything for that.
All right, yeah, I was struggling. A weird one is Flea. Flea? Yeah, the one that looked like a chick but was not a chick.
Confirmed as a dude, I believe.
Yeah, that was odd. Even in the game... I'm not saying I have anything with a problem, but it was very obviously shown to be a chick, and then when you take Flea's vest, I think. It goes, this is not a woman's vest. Ooh.
Well, I think that gets into one of those kind of common tropes where the trans character is is both goofy, but kind of goofy in a sinister way. I think that's an unfortunate stereotype in media that the trans people get lumped into.
And that was a very confusing thing for me as a younger child. But luckily, you don't see as much of that nowadays because we try harder. Anyways, we are coming up to the tail end of this particular episode. And Nick, I know you had some closing thoughts.
Yeah, when I kind of look back at this, and it's interesting to me how I had these computer games that had strong female characters in a medium that in general did not have a lot of this. And I think that in my instance, that a lot of that has to do with the kind of people who were hired by Sierra Games, because Sierra was responsible for a lot of these kind of characters. You had it was founded by Ken and Roberta Williams, and essentially it was founded because Roberta Williams was playing these text adventures and decided, well, I want to go ahead and do these as kind of a computer graphics thing. Ken Williams had recently purchased a computer and was working on coding a compiler, so she went ahead and told him about the kind of games that she wanted to make, and they worked on it together to create Mystery House, one of these first actual adventure games with computer graphics. So with that, you had kind of a husband-wife team, and I spoke at length about Quest for Glory previously. That was another husband and wife team. I'm forgetting the name of the husband, but it's Lori Cole is a woman who is responsible for writing a lot of these strong female characters. So this gets into the importance of representation. I think because you have these women in these creative roles speaking on behalf of what's realistic for a character and pushing to go ahead and have things that just kind of made sense, I think it really paints the case for value in trying to have diversity for creative works.
And, I mean, we see nowadays again, you get a mixed bag on this, but now that we're drawing from a much bigger pool, I know that some of my favorite indie studios right now, for example, Supergiant Games and Thunder Lotus, they're the ones who did Jotun, about half of their creative team are females. And I don't know if it's because females are on the team, just different perspectives. We're not going to contribute it to females. We're not going to contribute it to race. We're just going to say there's different perspectives now. And the more perspectives you get, the more opinions you get, the more well-rounded the idea can be. You need to voice it by as many different kinds of people as possible, because you want a lot of people to play and empathize and see what you're doing. So I'm glad we're seeing better representation. I'm glad that we're having people who don't feel excluded from these games anymore. I'm glad that people can see it and they're like, yeah, you know what? I could see that as me.
This isn't specific to female game characters, but I think of Battlefield 1941, not 1941. I think of the recent Battlefield game set in World War I, where it had a black male on the cover for that.
Yeah.
And the ridiculous hubbub and of anger and indignation that was surrounding that. On 4chan, of course. So liberal grains of salt here.
Oh, liberal.
Yeah, but I'm bumps. And it just seems so bizarre to me. I think I think a lot of the problem with this stuff gets into the people that approach this as kind of a zero-sum game where it's about adding on points, where every male character, every black character, every white character, every female character, any sort of character is taking out of some point total and divvying it up to a side. It's just this attitude that we don't have.
No, you were coming from a good place. The idea behind it was that we don't have to build toward the most inclusive game in the world. That if something has I'm not even going to say that it's a bad thing, but if you have a white male protagonist on the cover looking steely, it's boring. What is new about that? It's not even that it's bad because it's the same that it's always been. It's just you're not showing that you have creativity being brought to the table.
I don't particularly mind it either, though. Like if for a new Duke Nukem game, I would certainly buy that up. I'd buy that up in a heartbeat. This gets into the importance, I think, of representation. I think it goes back to what we discussed with Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 15. I have no problem with Final Fantasy 15 being a game centered on male characters exploring male bonding after having a game a game series focus on female characters. It's about having a broad set of creative diversity and not trying to be overly one-sided and focus on racking up more points for your imaginary team.
Right. And I really, really hope that
it's imaginary because gender's a construct.
Well... All right, you know what? I think we're good. So, I really think that we had some valid discussion today about how this influenced us, how it influenced future characters. I really liked how we broke down, for example, how Zelda progressed. I really liked talking about how Samus progressed. I liked all your Quest for Glory and your King's Quest. Was King's Quest one of them? Nope.
King's Quest did have female protagonists, though, so we may as well just add that in. King's Quest 4 and King's Quest 7 both had female leads.
And that is a very thorough knowledge. So I like what we did here today, personally. So on that note, Nick, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, Josh.
I implore you, if you have an opinion about this, please speak up. I would love to hear from more people on this.
Especially female opinions on this issue.
That would be great. I would really love to hear more ladies talk about what they think about this. But until next time, my name is Josh, and this is Co-Opinions.